We don't want to, even if you could hit an elk at 1,000 yards or whatever the number is, like, the things move. So it's not just about can you hit it, you know. And I talked about this in the original intro video, and I haven't really mentioned it since. Like, I don't even feel comfortable doing that stuff, you guys. Like, I know that's the what all the cool kids are doing, and that's what, you know, the big egos are doing right now, is trying to shoot elk at 1,000 yards or farther and do stuff like that. Like, I could probably hit an elk at 1,000 yards on the first shot, but they move, you know. Like, I shoot ELR for fun. I shoot over 2,000 yards just for fun because I enjoy it and I'm really good at it. But I still don't like the idea of shooting animals that far away because they move. And when you're in the mountains, like, I don't think a lot of people realize, especially if they're new to this, like, how long it takes to travel that far. Like, if you're in the mountains and you're shooting from one side of a canyon to the other and it's 1,000 yards away, it might take you 3-4 hours to get there on foot. You know, it's not like walking 1,000 yards in a bean field or something. This is, you got nasty terrain and whatever. So, like, even though, you know, some of these things might be capable of doing that, I don't think it's a good idea. I didn't intend to derail on this tangent, but it's just something that struck me. Like, you know, even though 640 yards is kind of fish in a barrel to me, it's still a long way, because these things can, you know, start moving at any time, and then your best laid plans go to shit in a hurry. So despite the fact that we did a really abbreviated load development process, here's the, in my opinion, incredible performance that we were able to bring out of all 4 cartridges, regardless of their pluses and minuses, regardless of the rifle design and the components used and the brands and whatever. Doesn't matter. You know, give me a rifle that's sound and not broke, and I'll make it shoot. Hey guys, Tim with Little Crow Gunworks. Welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to spend time talking about the 4 cartridges in the 7mm Showdown series, and now that all the testing's done and the dust is settled, we're going to look at what we actually were able to achieve for performance with each one, and kind of look at them head to head and compare the different precision metrics that we were able to achieve, and therefore what that what advantages or disadvantages, or what, you know, kind of how everything works out as far as performance and range error forgiveness and wind error forgiveness, and see what our error budgets are with each cartridge, and with our actual results, and then also theoretical results had all of the rifles shot at an equal level of precision. And then we're also going to look at what it took to get here, as far as the reloading processes and steps that I did, equipment I used, that sort of thing, like what it took to get this kind of performance. And then we're going to look at energy figures and basically what the realistic range limitation is for each cartridge based on the performance we were able to achieve. And I think that'll be it for this video. And then the last video of the series will be we'll analyze cost to own. So basically look at what it costs to operate each one of these, a rifle with each one of these cartridges. And we'll talk about barrel life and how that translates and how that affects cost to own, for each of these cartridges. And then we'll also, in the next video, talk about kind of my assessments and my takeaways from doing this series and loading for each one of these cartridges, and what I would do if I were to build each one, and who I think each of these cartridges is best for, you know, depending on the type of person you are and maybe where your geographic location is, or, you know, whatever your particulars are, kind of who each of these are best suited for. And then we'll kind of put a bow on it, and that'll be a wrap on this series until we decide we want to test something else in 7mm. Then We'll likely tack additional videos in this category. I don't know that they'll, I'll do part number whatever and continue the parts. I might just add stuff to this category. So those of you that are interested in 7mm stuff, it's all in one place. So, but as usual, I'd like to start out by saying thank you to our viewers and subscribers. I know there's a bunch of new subscribers. Thanks to Austin at Reloading Weatherby. He's been mentioning us a bit in his videos, and he's been watching the 7 series and learning a lot from it and trying to apply these things to his hand loading processes and different rifles, and trying to get everything he has to shoot better than it is and basically get the most out of everything that he can. So I want to say thank you to Austin. And I'm actually working with him on a kind of a mini series on a 7 WSM that he's working on for his son. We're collaborating on a low development process for that rifle, and so you'll see me on some of his videos if you do happen to watch his channel. I'm helping him out with that, and we're going to see what we can wring out of that 7 WSM. So I'd invite you to check that out. But I think we'll jump right into it right away here. There wasn't the only thing I've really been noticing in the comments that guys are asking questions about in light of new technology available, I think I'll address in this video here. So without further ado, we'll get our screen recording fired up here. 3, 2, 1, and we're live. All right, so we'll jump right into pictures, just reviewing our rifles. So here's our 280 Ackley again. Sporter type stock, traditional sporter type stock, steel barrel, no fluting, with Cerakote, hinged floor plate magazine, traditional trigger, overweight, heavy tactical optic that we're just using it for testing. That's not something I would recommend for a hunting rifle. It's overkill and heavy, but it did the job for our testing. 7PRC hooked up to our Thoroughfare ultralight carbon fiber tripod. Carbon fiber everything, carbon fiber stock, carbon fiber barrel, Zermatt Arms Origin Action, moderate weight package. I think it was in the 10.5 to high 10 pound finished weight as you see it without the tripod. Very, very accurate rifle. 280 was as well. And this 7PRC has a more appropriate weight, hunting weight optic. This is our bread and butter. This is set up exactly the way we would want to set it up if you let us pick everything. And then our 7 Rem Mag, a lot different from the other rifles. More traditional sporter, laminate wood stock. Tikka action, so I would call this a semi-custom or a full custom with a Tikka donor action. Spiral fluted steel barrel, which we prefer because we like to build rifles with as heavy a contour barrel as you'll tolerate, and then use fluting basically to take weight off, and that looks nice. Hunting weight optic, that's a Vortex AMG, really high-end, lightweight optic. And then our 28 Nosler, kind of parallel, well, I guess it's kind of a hybrid of some of the other rifles. It's a more traditional shape stock, but it's fiberglass with carbon fiber barrel, and Night Force NXS, kind of a tactical style optic. I think this rifle was also in the 10 something pound finished weight neighborhood. And now we'll go into our performance. So this slide is, there's a lot on here. This is what I'm calling our cartridge precision and error budget. So this is a summary of what we were actually able to wring out of each cartridge with each powder. You know, and I railed on this during the series that the load development for each of these was not thorough. It was pretty abbreviated, and despite that, here's what we were able to get out of each one. So let's start with the long range metrics at 640 yards. You see I have each cartridge listed at the top, and they're color coded. And the entire column is color coded, so it's easy to follow along. Let's start by just looking at this top half. Average velocity, we have, so the different metrics on the side, we have average velocity, extreme spread, vertical minute of angle that the ammo held at long range, and then vertical plus the shift. So this vertical MOA is a representation of the vertical it shot plus the shift, and then this eighth line is what is that represented in inches. So that's basically just this MOA in inches at 640 yards. So with the 280 Ackley, by the time we shot it, it was cold, so we lost a little bit of velocity there compared to when we tested during the summer. But that average velocity on the day we tested at long range was 2876 feet a second. And this, again, for those of you that are new, this is all with the Hornady 160 grain CX. Average velocity 2876, extreme spread of 14, vertical 0.588, very good, which works out to 3.94 inches at 640 yards. Damn good. Very small. 7 PRC. The hand load we ended up taking out there was on the slower side for what that cartridge is capable of, but if it shoots well, don't lose sleep over not getting the maximum velocity. 2976 was the average, extreme spread also 14. Vertical minute of angle plus the shift worked out to 0.700, which is 4.69 inches. Still very good. And then our Hodgdon 4831 shortcut load shot the best in the whole series of everything. Average 3051, which ironically, if you remember, in part one, when I made that initial slide and we were talking about external ballistics and trying to figure out theoretical hit probability at long range, I took a stab in the dark at where I thought the 7 PRC was going to land before we even built the gun, at where we were going to land with this 160 CX. And if you remember, I had that estimated velocity at 3,048, and we ended up at 3,051, 3 feet a second away. The extreme spread on that one, which is very interesting, and you guys that are new, I railed on this in the series, but look at the extreme spreads of all these different loads with the different rifles. At 640 yards, the Hodgdon 4831 shortcut load had the highest extreme spread, but shot the smallest. And shot the least amount of vertical. So all these other videos out there that are lying to you that, ES is the most important thing and it has to be as low as possible to shoot small at long range, it's nonsense. I think at some point it does matter, but for this job, 600 yards, or up to 600 yards on big game, it doesn't matter. It matters a little bit, but as long as your ES, like we said in the series, as long as your ES is under 50, that's good enough. Focus on the group size and that the group doesn't shift around every time you take it out. You want it to hit in the same place and have reasonable extreme spread, and try to get as much velocity as you can without mortgaging brass life and precision and consistency. So I like velocity, but not at the expense of anything else. I don't want to lose precision or consistency for velocity. That's not a good trade-off for me. So this one, 37 was the extreme spread. Vertical plus the shift was only 0.443 minute of angle, and if you remember, that shot one of the groups was only 1.5 inches for 3 shots at 640. Just unbelievable. And then the vertical plus shift in inches is 2.97. Stupid small. That's like credit card size. Vertical. Really small. And then the 7 mag, we did get a little more velocity out of that cartridge, which didn't surprise me at all. I figured that would happen going in the series. It's bigger, so that's the way it goes. And ironically, these two hand loads that we brought out were almost identical velocity and charge weight. The where it wanted to shoot the best with 78-28 was 1/10 of a grain more than 48-31 shortcut. So as far as I'm concerned, those two powders are identical. At least for these two cartridges, the 7RM Mag, 7 PRC, they behaved exactly the same way. With a lot of 78-28 shortcut that I had and a lot of 48-31 shortcut that Dale had. So our velocity was 78-28, average was 3109, extreme spread also 14, vertical plus shift 0.560 MOA, which in inches is only 3.75, all very small, you can see. And then Hodgdon 48-31 shortcut, this actually shot the worst of any of the hand loads. Still was acceptable by my criteria, but because you can see, like when we translate it in inches, it's not terrible. It's the worst of the bunch, but it's still not awful by any stretch of the imagination. So extreme spread on that one was 22. Vertical minute of angle plus shift worked out to 0.938. Vertical plus shift in inches 6.28. So you can see a bit bigger than all the other similar and slower loads, but not terrible. And then we go to the fire-breathing Dragon, the 28 Nosler. That average on the day I did the final testing for Dale, I think it was in August or something, or September. Average velocity was 33.15. This actually had the best extreme spread out of anything, only 11. And the vertical minute of angle plus shift was 0.775, which works out to 5.2 inches of vertical plus shift. Still very small. And that one I think actually shot the most consistent groups. I think both groups were like sub 4 inches or under 4 1/4, like the whole group. And then the vertical on the two groups I think were both like 3 1/4 or something. Like they had identical vertical and the groups are almost identical. It was really weird, but they had a little bit of shift in between them, which made it the second worst load, hand load in the series out of all the different rifles, but still shot very good. So you can see, like, based on the hand loading method that I showed you guys, which is very abbreviated, and isn't definitive, but the way I look at it is you're basically trying to spot trends, and that's enough. That can be enough to get really good performance, especially when we're talking about big game. Like, these are big targets, and we have to keep in mind the fact that they move, they're living. So we don't want to, even if you could hit an elk at 1,000 yards or whatever the number is, like, the things move. So it's not just about can you hit it, and I talked about this in the original intro video, and I haven't really mentioned it since. Like, I don't even feel comfortable doing that stuff, you guys. Like, I know that's what all the cool kids are doing, and that's what the big egos are doing right now, is trying to shoot elk at 1,000 yards or farther and do stuff like that. Like, I could probably hit an elk at 1,000 yards on the first shot, but they move. Like, I shoot ELR for fun. I shoot over 2,000 yards just for fun because I enjoy it and I'm really good at it. But I still don't like the idea of shooting animals that far away because they move. And when you're in the mountains, like, I don't think a lot of people realize, especially if they're new to this, like, how long it takes to travel that far. Like, if you're in the mountains and you're shooting from one side of a canyon to the other and it's 1,000 yards away, it might take you 3-4 hours to get there on foot. It's not like walking 1,000 yards in a bean field or something. This is, you got nasty terrain and whatever. So, like, even though, some of these things might be capable of doing that, I don't think it's a good idea. I didn't intend to derail on this tangent, but it's just something that struck me. Like, even though 640 yards is kind of fish in a barrel to me, it's still a long way, because these things can, start moving at any time, and then your best laid plans go to shit in a hurry. So despite the fact that we did a really abbreviated load development process, here's the, in my opinion, incredible performance that we were able to bring out of all 4 cartridges, regardless of their pluses and minuses, regardless of the rifle design and the components used and the brands and whatever. Doesn't matter. Give me a rifle that's sound and not broke and I'll make it shoot. So what did it take to get here? Why don't we talk about that? So go back to this. All right. So this slide, what does it actually take to produce precision like this? Aside from having a sound rifle that was put together by somebody competent and isn't broke, doesn't necessarily need to be a custom rifle, although that's what we do, but it doesn't have to be a custom rifle to get that kind of performance. It helps because you're eliminating variables when you have a custom rifle. That's what we're doing. We're minimizing variables and using all high quality parts and on, so that it comes more down to your hand loading ability and your skill and not the equipment. That's the point of a custom rifle. And the fact that you get to pick everything. You get to make all the decisions, where when you're buying a factory gun, you don't get what you want. You get what they got. So that's where for a lot of people it's worth it to spend the extra money. So assuming you have a sound weapon and you are a hand loader, what does it actually take to produce precision like this? So if we look at this long list. Full length resize virgin brass. Weight sort brass. Fire form the brass before you do any testing. Then after you fire form, wet tumble the brass. Then anneal the brass. Uniform primer pockets. Deburr flash holes. Use an expander mandrel to set neck tension. Seat the bullets with an arbor seeder die or amp bullet seeder press. Sort bullets by weight. Sort bullets by base to ogive. Seat primers with a $600 Primal Rights primer seeder. Store loaded ammo in a controlled environment. Keep ammo well shaded in the field to control environmental effects. Test in early morning, calm conditions with minimal wind or mirage. Drum roll. This is a pretty comprehensive list of things I did not do in this series. Ever. At all. I did not do, if you see it on this list, I did not do it to achieve the precision that we just reviewed. Let that sink in. What did I do? How about we go into that? So we have our list on the left that we just reviewed of stuff that if you, I'm going to say, don't value your time and you just enjoy doing all that nonsense to shoot a big game animal, which is a giant target, knock yourself out. Here's what we did do in reality. We took really high quality brass, which helps eliminate variables, which I'm going to talk about in the upcoming hand loading series. We took really good brass, which if you have really good brass, you really don't need to do all this crap that's on the left. We chamfer and deburr the virgin case mouth. Charged powder with a really accurate scale. Seat bullets with an inexpensive seating die. Seat bullets perfectly measured to the ogive, accurate to 1/1000th of an inch. So very, I'm going to say flawless seating depth consistency from round to round. Hand prime with an RCBS hand primer. Boy, that's fancy. No sorting whatsoever of anything. Nothing. Brass, bullets, nothing. No sorting, no culling, no grooming, no nothing. Size brass with an inexpensive, basic, full-length die set. Bump the shoulders back 2 to 3/1000ths of an inch. I'm not going to go into this right now, but when you bump the shoulder back, you are full-length sizing the entire case all the way to the base. So that is a complete full-length size. But how much you're setting the shoulder back is critical. I only set the shoulders back 2 to 3 thousandths depending on the case. I think the Ackley and the Nosler I did 3 thousandths. The Ackley, because the shoulder's so steep with that 40 degree, they like to be set back a little more. And the Nosler, because it's such a big pig and really stupid and square, those like to be set back a little farther. The Remag and the PRC, I only set back 2 thousandths. That's just enough so that it goes in the gun and you don't feel any pressure when you close the bolt. That's all you need. You don't need more than that. If you follow the instructions on the die box, you're probably going to bump the shoulders back. You know, with the PRC, it's probably only going to be 2 or 3, but with like a 7 Remag, if you follow the instructions on the die box, you're probably setting it back 10 or 12 or 14 thousandths, and then you are on a glide path to case head separations. Number 9, dry tumble in corncob media to remove case lube after sizing. Number 10, trim to a uniform length with our world's finest trimmers. And then after trimming, refresh the chamfer and deburr. And seat bullets, number 12, seat bullets and go shoot. 13, test in real world conditions with mirage, wind blowing, snow, whatever. And then test at long range in full sun and not protect the ammo at all. So that's what it took. I know a lot of guys have been curious throughout this series about my hand loading process, which I'm going to go into in the upcoming hand loading series. I think I'm going to call it What Really Matters Hand Loading. Basically how to get the most performance without doing all the stupid stuff on the left side of the screen that you don't need to do. Oh, I forgot turning necks on that list. Damn it. I was looking at that list trying to think of what am I forgetting. Turning necks, yeah, you don't need to do that crap. So I'm going to go into that in the hand loading series, like what actually matters and what you need to do to get as much out of it as you can without buying every gadget and gizmo and doing every stupid time-sucking step that you've been told you have to do to get stuff to shoot well. That is such fringe, like diminishing returns stuff that you don't need to do. We'll go into that. And now I think I have a slide too that guys were curious about the process and curious about what I used. Here we go. Equipment used. The press I happen to have is a Redding Ultramag. It's a big giant single stage press that I can easily do Chi-Tac size cases, and I think I could do 416 Barrett and 50 BMG in a pinch if I had to. The cast of the press actually has sleeves on the top for different diameter dies, and I think with the different sleeves that go in it, I think I can go all the way to 50 BMG and therefore 416 Barrett if I had to. So big, giant, single-stage press. Number 2, Redding and RCBS standard full-length die sets. Boy, that's fancy. No neck sizing dies, no micrometer seating dies, no arbor press seating dies, no nothing. Plain Jane, bare bones, $40, $50 die sets, whatever they are. Probably more now because everything's so damn expensive, but basic dies. Number 3, Little Crow Gunworks World Finest Trimmers. Number 4, RCBS Trimmate Prep Center with VLD chamfer tool. Speed. All about speed. Consistency, but also speed. That's why we love our trimmers. There's nothing faster than our trimmers. And then the RCBS Trimmate Prep Center, you can zip through all the different steps real quick. RCBS hand primer, I already mentioned that fancy thing. Frankfurt Arsenal vibratory tumbler with just basic corncob media. No additives, no nothing. Scale, this is fancy. And I think it's very important. Does everybody need one? No. I talked about this, oh boy, here we're going to derail. And I'll go into this more in the hand loading series, but there is a big riff in hand loading where there's a lot of different camps on how you achieve a really good ES in a hand load. Some people think it has to do with flat spots. If you watch Hornady's videos, they talk about that being BS, where if you just increase the sample size, all the flat spots go away and you just get a straight line. That's the camp I'm in. I don't believe in flat spots. What I do believe in is that although based on charge weight, the charge weight average velocity will represent a straight line, I think within that line, certain charge weights will produce better ES than others, depending on where it's happy and where it's happy with the combustion. But also I think your extreme spread variance has to do with your charge weight. So I think having a really consistent charge weight helps, where if you are going to splurge on something, make it a scale. You don't have to get this, what I have here is a A&D FX 120i with a McDonald Innovations Auto Trickler V4. You don't have to have that. It's nice. It's, top shelf, but you don't have to have that. Just a RCBS Charge Master, or if you want to go for the Charge Master or the RCBS Match Master, which I think Austin just got one, that's fine. You don't need to get any more crazy than that. That's accurate enough that you're going to get as good of extreme spreads as you can, provided your sizing process is sound and, whatever. We'll go into all this in the hand loading series, but that's enough. Don't feel like you have to get this scale, but I think you are going to struggle trying to replicate the precision that we did in this series if you're using a powder measure, like just the clunk powder measure, or even a beam scale. Those can have some error, inherent error built into them depending on who makes it and which one you have. And I think all that's going to do is increase the window of charge weights that you throw, so your charge weights are going to be a little less consistent. And I think in the big picture, that's going to add a little bit to your extreme spread. Is it going to add a lot in terms of precision? It's tough to say. At short range, I would say no. Long range, I would also say no, it depends on how big the variance is. I think that you reach a point where the charge weight variance, it is going to start making your groups grow at long range, and I think that's more from like a harmonic standpoint and not necessarily ES. It's very complicated, but I think you should have a good scale, I guess, is what I should boil this down to. If you're going to splurge on something, make it to scale. And then I also use number 8, Hornady lock and load bullet comparators for measuring base to ogive on loaded rounds. So when you're seating the bullet, measure the ogive using the Hornady bullet comparator tools. So, because the ogive is the most consistent part of the bullet. The tip is not consistent, the ogive is. So measuring to the ogive, you're going to find that doing it that way, your seating depths get to be a lot more consistent. If the manual tells you load a cartridge to 3.340, you can measure to the tip to get the die set down to 3.340. But then once it's approximately 3.340, you can put this comparator on and measure the ogive and then write down that new number. So that way like you're measuring to a consistent place, and you can see how consistent your ammo comes out of your dies based on how you do it. And we'll go into that in the hand loading series too. And then number 9, Hornady lock and load headspace gauges. Same thing. We're measuring base to shoulder length when we full length size the brass to ensure 0.002 to 0.003, 2 or 3 thousandths shoulder bump. So you can use those to measure. One thing I left out here too is a Lee universal decapping die. Everybody should have one. Get a Lee universal decapping die. I would also recommend getting their undersized decapping pin for that die. I think the die is like $12 or $13, and then they have an undersized decapping pin that works with like Lapua and really small flash hole brass. Because if you take the standard Lee decapping die and run it through Lapua brass, you're going to bung up the brass and wreck it. So I'd recommend getting the undersized pin. So that way, after you fire something, after you do your initial ladder test or whatever, you can use that Lee universal decapping die, knock the primer out so it's not interfering with your measurement, and then measure from the base with these Hornady headspace gauges, from the base to the shoulder, so you know, like, okay, on a fired piece of brass, here's how big my chamber is. And then you can use your sizing die and adjust that and keep screwing it in until when you full length size the brass, you're only bumping the shoulder as much as you need to, at 2 to 3 thousandths. You're not just following the instructions that come in the die box and oversizing the brass. And then any digital caliper. Doesn't matter. I just like digital because I think it's faster to read, and I'm not going to say it's more accurate than a analog, but I feel like it's easier to read, quicker. So that's what I use. So now that we know what steps and equipment it took to get here, we'll go back to this cartridge precision and error budget. So we already looked at this. We looked at the top half and saw what kind of performance we were able to bring out of each of these cartridges. Now, if we think back to part 9, where we talked about what really matters for Western hunting accuracy, and we talked about our theoretical 17-inch wide by 12-inch tall oval, where we want all of our bullets to land, with most of them landing on an 8-inch square within that oval. So now we're going to talk about our error budget, or our forgiveness, based on that 17-inch wide by 12-inch tall oval. So based on this performance we see above, what does that give us as far as range error forgiveness? Because these loads had really good ES and, more importantly, shot really short vertical, what does that then give us for a range error budget? Like, how far off can we be on the range and still land a bullet in that 12-inch vertical oval? And then how much wind forgiveness do we have to still stay on 17-inch wide oval? And then we have it sorted by each cartridge, and then I also have at different elevations, because the air density is different, how much the bullet slows down and how it disperses changes. So we have basically our error budget at sea level, at 5,000 feet, and at 10,000 feet. And maybe I'll scroll to get rid of that stuff on the top there so we're not distracted. All right. So based on our 17-inch wide by 12-inch tall oval, our 280 Ackley, I'll leave it so we can see the cartridge and the load. Our 280 Ackley had, and I'm sure a lot of you are reading ahead and looking at this and seeing that there's not as much disparity as you might have thought based on cartridge performance. So based on what we actually achieved at sea level, our range error forgiveness with the 280 Ackley is 24 yards. So we can be wrong by 12 yards either way. So if the animal's at 500 or 600 in this case, or 640, if the animal's really at 640, we can punch into our solver anywhere from 652 to 638 or 628 and still land it on that 12-inch vertical. And then wind forgiveness is 5 miles an hour only. So plus or minus 2.5. So you can be off by 2.5 miles an hour either way and still hit it. And then at I think maybe we'll go across on cartridge and then look at the different conditions. The 7PRC with our 78-28 load and how that shot, we didn't gain anything range-wise, and we gained 0.5 mile an hour of wind. The 48-31 load, because it shot the best, we gained an additional 4 yards of ranging error, so we had plus or minus 14 instead of plus or minus 12, and our wind forgiveness went up to 5.8 miles an hour. A difference, but not a huge difference. 7 rem mag, 78-28, that shot the best of the 7 rem mag loads, shot really short with not a lot of shift. So we have 26.5 yards error budget range-wise and 5.8 miles an hour wind allowance, or wind error budget. And then the 48-31 shortcut 7 rem mag, that shot the worst, so we only have 18 yards of error budget, plus or minus 9. and only 4.3 miles an hour of wind forgiveness. So you see how, like, I think a lot of guys were probably watching this series, looking at all the groups we shot at long range, going, well, none of these are bad. You know, even the 7 Rem Mag with 48-31, like, it was bigger than the rest, but it's still not bad. Well, you know, even just going up to 6.28 inches of vertical plus shift, you see how, compared to the others, that starts really lopping off your range error forgiveness. Like, it's 6 yards worse than the 280, despite the fact that the 280 is 220 feet a second slower. Like, that's a huge difference in velocity. And despite that, because the 280 shot so much better, and by so much better I'm talking only 2.25 inches of vertical, you gained 6 yards of range forgiveness, plus or minus 3. So this stuff, it really starts to matter when you put numbers to it like this. And I know nobody else online is analyzing stuff like this. It's all drop charts and drift charts, and you look at that and you go, oh, well, this one drifts less and it drops less, it must be better. That could not be more useless information. So, and then our 28 Nosler, that was a little bit better than our 7 Rem Mag 48-31 load, but not a lot. So that range forgiveness, because of the vertical shift that it had, was the same as the 7 PRC 78-28 and the 280. Despite the fact that it's, whatever that is, 450 feet a second, 440 feet a second faster. And then our wind forgiveness, same thing, 4.8 miles an hour. And you see how the elevation, we won't run through each one just in the interest of time, but you see, like, the air getting thinner, you don't gain a ton as far as your range error budget, but you do gain a considerable amount in wind drift forgiveness, which is, in my opinion, more important, because the wind is the hardest thing to master. Getting a good range to target with laser rangefinders, if you know how to use yours, is pretty easy nowadays, provided that you actually hit the target. You know, and I didn't mention this in the earlier videos, but that gets more difficult the farther you go. So, like, that's another reason why I don't agree with these super long shots on animals, is that the farther away the animal is, the less likely you're going to get an accurate range on it. So it's like a problem that eats itself, where, you know, it's more important that you get an accurate range the farther you go, but it's harder to get an accurate range the farther you go. So it's like, it gets worse and worse and worse the farther you go, even though it's more critical. So, but we see our wind forgiveness here, that gets considerably better. Now here's where the fire-breathing dragon, like a 28 Nosler, shines, is that we only had 4.8 miles an hour of wind forgiveness at sea level, which was almost the worst. But then by the time we get out, we're up at 10,000 feet, it has the best wind forgiveness, because we're starting at such a high velocity and the bullet doesn't slow down as much. None of these, you know, none of them slow down as much. So the faster we're going, the more advantage you have. And then you go, okay, well, it's kind of hard to pick out, like, what's best and what, you know, because they all had different levels of performance. Well, then I did another slide here that we'll go to. This is cartridge precision and air budget, but it's theoretical. So this is, well, I guess it's a combination of theoretical and actual. I used our actual velocities that we achieved. I brought it into 600 yards, so not 640, brought it into 600, which we kind of set as our limit for the series on big game. And I used our actual velocity average that we achieved, but then I used a theoretical extreme spread and made them all the same. So they're all 18 feet a second, which I think is very achievable, considering that we had 14, 14, 37, 14, 22, and 11. You know, I think going into this, a lot of people thought the extreme spread would be the worst on the 28 Nosler because it's such a monster, but it was actually the best. Picked the right powder. Ta-da! And then our vertical MOA, I just did an average of 0.637, only to get because it's realistic to achieve, but also to get round numbers, so that our vertical plus shift is in theory 4 inches, which is very achievable considering at 640 yards we were sub 4, a little over 4, sub 3, sub 4, 6 1/4, and 5.2. So in theory, if we could make them all shoot the same, again, forgiveness based on our 17-inch wide by 12-inch tall oval. These are all at 30 degrees with a 15 mile an hour crosswind. And then we have our different elevations: sea level, 5,000 feet, 10,000 feet. So now that the playing field is leveled outside of just raw velocity, everything else being the same, treating everything the same, now we can actually see what each cartridge and stepping up in each level of performance actually gains you. At sea level, you can see there isn't a drastic difference in wind forgiveness when they all shoot the same, but when they all shoot the same, there is a bit of range error forgiveness as we go up in velocity. We have 24 yards with the 280, 26 with the slower 7PRC, 30 with the faster, 30 also with the 7 rem mag, because going from 3050 to 3100 didn't change our error budget for range, but then gaining another 215 feet a second gave us another 4 yards of range error budget. And then wind forgiveness, we start at 5.6 miles an hour for the 280, go up to 6 slow 6s with the 7PRC, low 6s with the 7 rem mag, and only 6.5 with the 28 Osler. And then I also put time of flight on here too for those that are curious. You can see how your time of flight is affected not only by velocity but also lower air density. The bullet gets there faster, doesn't drift as much, and on, shoots flatter because it's not slowing down as much. Now look at 5,000 feet. The range error budget stays the same for the 280. Wind error budget goes up by 1.4 miles an hour. That's a pretty significant gain. So now you have plus or minus 3 mile an hour forgiveness. And when we go up to the 7PRC, the slower one, we went up to 20 from 26 to 28 yards. The faster load stayed at 30, and our wind forgiveness stepped up a bit, went from 6 miles an hour to 7.6 and 6.2 to 8. That's pretty significant. And then our time of flight decreased a little bit, obviously. 7 rem mag, our range error budget went from 30 yards to 31 yards, so not a huge difference, going up to only 5,000 feet. Wind error budget increased significantly from 6.2 to 8 miles an hour. That's a sizable increase. And then our 28 Osler range error budget went from 34 yards to 36. Not that significant. Wind error budget was increased a decent amount from 6.5 miles an hour to 8. And our time of flight decreased a little bit, obviously. And then when we get to 10,000 feet, our 280 range error budget only increased to 26 yards. So you see when you're down in these lower, more moderate velocity cartridges, you don't gain a ton just by making the air density lower, by going up in elevation. You gain a little bit, but not a lot as far as range error budget, because it's a moderate trajectory. It's not a high step and hot rod. So, but because we are using a high BC bullet and we have a really accurate rifle, the air density does help our wind forgiveness because the bullet isn't slowing down as much as it is at lower elevation. So where we started at 5.6 mile an hour wind error budget, we went all the way to 9 miles an hour. That's really good. Time of flight 0.710 seconds. 7PRC, we went from 28 yards to 30 yards, going from 5,000 feet to 10,000, and the faster load went from 30 yards to 34 yards. Pretty significant. And what is that? 8 yards more forgiveness than the 280, but only 1 mile an hour wind forgiveness, which again, wind is the important part. Range, I'd like to think no matter what rangefinder you use, and if you half-ass know how to use it, I would think that getting a range within 26 or 30 or 34 yards is extremely doable. And then 7 mag, we're also at 34 yards like the faster 7 PRC load, and that extra 50 feet a second, 60 feet a second only gained us 0.2 miles an hour of wind forgiveness. So you see, like, the 7 PRC loading it up to full potential or just below full potential, and same thing with the 7 mag, they're kind of the same cartridge. You know, as far as performance, they're extremely similar. And I'll go into this more in the reflections on the next video, but not a lot of difference. You know, the differences that they do have are pretty trivial. And then Fire-Breathing Dragon, we get up to 38 yards of range error budget and only 10.4 miles an hour. So you see that 220 feet a second over the 7 mag only gained us 0.2 miles an hour of wind drift forgiveness. Not a lot. So, you know, once you get a high BC bullet that shoots well and shoots really small, and you go up to high elevation, you're not gaining a ton, you know. And here's the thing, maybe we'll derail here for a second. When you look at drop charts and drop and drift charts that everybody else likes to use when they do cartridge comparisons, which again to me are useless, they're very misleading. Where if you were to compare this 280 load and this 28 Nosler load, they'd be like unbelievably different. You'd be like, oh, the 28 Nosler stomps the 280. You know, it'd have way less drop, and at this distance in a 15 mile an hour crosswind, you know, the 280 is probably going to have like 18 inches more drift. Well, that only matters if you're doing like Kentucky windage and you're just half-ass guessing. Well, even then you have to make a good guess. If you're using any kind of ballistic solver, or you make yourself a little drop chart card that you stick to the stock ahead of time or whatever, that's going to tell you how much to compensate for the wind based on, you know, however many miles an hour it is. So the fact that the 28 Nosler drifts maybe half as much doesn't mean shit. You know, if your solution with a 28 Nosler tells you to hold off, you know, say 3 minutes or whatever, and the 280 Ackley tells you to hold off 4.5 minutes, what's the difference? It doesn't matter, you know, whether you're actually dialing it or you're holding off this much or that much. That doesn't make any difference. The one's just as easy as the other. What matters is how much forgiveness and error budget you have, which is what you should care about, not the numbers on a drop chart. Those don't mean shit. What you should be worrying about is this, like, what am I actually gaining in terms of forgiveness, and what am I giving up by adding that much more performance? That's what I really wanted to show you guys in this series, is like, because what you're being sold by so many other videos is just like paper comparisons of, well, this one drops way less and it has less drift. Well, it's a matter of clicks. It's not, you know, in a given set of conditions, when you dial the same, you know, you dial what you need for the 280 and you dial what you need for the 28 Nosler, what's actually going to happen in reality? Like, how much is it really going to matter? Well, this is what I'm trying to show you guys, is like, the difference in error budget is not nearly as significant as the difference in drop and drift on a drop and drift chart. Those charts are super misleading. When the rubber meets the road, this is what matters, not a drop and drift chart. And you can see, going from a 280 all the way to a 28 Nosler, it doesn't make that big a difference. You know, the range error budget is significant, but I'd like to think you don't need 38 or 26 yards of range error budget, no matter what. Like, if you range the animal and he moves a long way from when you ranged him, range him again. Don't, you know, be lazy and go, oh, well, I'm in a hurry, I gotta, you know, because these longer range shots, you shouldn't be rushing anyway. You should take all the time you need, and if you don't feel confident before you break the trigger, don't shoot. So, and then the little wild card I have over here, in green next to the 28 Nosler. What's that? Well, that is a 7 PRC. If you remember back from when we started, we were comparing the 160 CX at 3048, so 3 feet a second slower than this, compared to a 175 ELDX going 2914. So that's what this is. Put that in bigger font so you guys can see it. That's what that is. So if we look at this over here, I'll highlight this so it stands out. I'll highlight this a different color. Okay, so we have, so this is the same 175 grain ELDX at 2914 being held to the same precision standards as the CX. Here's what you actually gain at 600 yards. Our range error budget is better with the CX. Why? Because it's going faster. And the time of flight is less, as you can see, 0.664 versus 0.682. Flatter trajectory. So we have 34 yards of error budget compared to 30 with the 175 grain ELDX. Wind error budget at 10,000 feet at 600 yards in a 15 mile an hour crosswind. The difference, the ELDX has a 0.6 mile per hour advantage. Whoop-de-frickin'-do. That's not 0.6 either way. That's 0.6 total. So with the ELDX, your wind forgiveness is 5 miles an hour this way, 5 that way. With this ELDX, it's 5.3 and 5.3. Whoop-de-doo. So you guys that have been sold on you have to have the highest BC possible, and that's going to be a magic wand, turn your rifle into a magic wand, you've been lied to for a long time. It doesn't matter. Now, if you're going to shoot at ranges that we already agreed that you shouldn't be shooting at, that advantage would be a little better, but in the first 600 yards, doesn't matter. And the closer you get than 600, that number goes down, not up. That 0.6 mile an hour advantage it has, that decreases the closer you get. So, anyway. All right, so now I think we'll go into velocity and energy. So we did actual performance, we did theoretical performance, where if you level the playing field and make them all the same, and the only difference is velocity, what does that actually get you? Now we'll look at velocity and energy, which, you know, I think is a little more accessible on other channels. This is what guys like to talk about. We'll see how each cartridge compares here. So what we see here is each cartridge has their own column, color-coded, and then for each cartridge we have the case capacity from fired brass. We showed this in, I think, the first video, but I just wanted to bring it back up. And then we have our maximum velocity that I was able to achieve using the same brass with each cartridge by my standards, same primers, looking for the same pressure sign on each one. And then we also have our sweet spot, which is where it wanted to shoot, like where each cartridge to me seemed the happiest and most consistent. And that is a window of velocity. It's not a specific velocity, and I really don't even think it's necessarily a window of velocity. I think it's kind of like a window of pressure that it seems to be happy with, more so than the exact velocity. And then we have our sweet spot muzzle energy for each cartridge. And then these charts underneath, we have our 3 environmental conditions again: sea level, a sea level column, a 5,000 feet column, and a 10,000 feet column. So you can see how the first number in each of these is velocity, and the second number is energy. So you can see how the velocity and energy decay at distance. And based on the bullet we picked, being the 160 CX, and the fact that this was based around, the series was based around shooting elk or moose, you know, big stuff. You see I have the or a certain distance for each cartridge where the color is orange. And the reason I did orange was I looked at that as kind of the max effective range with that cartridge at that atmosphere. Because I know Hornady advertises that bullet will expand down to 2,000 feet a second. To me, that's cutting it kind of close, or I like to see that higher, like in the 22s at a minimum. And then also for elk, I like to see, with a mono, I like to see 1,800 foot-pounds of arrival energy to make sure that when that mono expands, it's going to have enough juice to hopefully get all the way through and blow out the backside and get an exit wound and get air rushing in to that chest and collapsing the lungs, and you get a blood trail, and on and on. We covered all that. So, and then red, to me, is kind of the no-go zone. And I know people have different opinions on this, but some of them, or most of them, I put the numbers, that you still have to retain energy and velocity, but to me, that's kind of the no-fly zone. So you can see at the different yard lines and different atmospheres where each of these cartridges kind of tap out. So that can kind of help you figure out like what bucket you're in and what you really need for performance and where you intend to hunt and all that. So I don't think we'll run through each one. We'll just talk about like the particulars at the top of each one, because you guys can pause this and study it to your heart's content, and then we'll kind of look at where each one punches out and how they compare to each other. So we'll start at the top. Case capacity on the 280 Ackley was about 72 grains of water capacity. Max velocity was 2940. That's kind of where all of our powders pressured out, thereabouts. Might have been able to get 20 or 30 feet a second more by using a slower powder, but then we run the risk of not all the powder burning before the bullet exits the muzzle, which in my opinion causes consistency issues and can make the load more fussy. And I feel like the trade-off isn't worth it. I feel like you're sacrificing consistency for a very meager amount of velocity, which, as I just got done showing you, even drastic amounts of added velocity doesn't amount to hardly anything as far as a performance increase, a real performance increase. Not a drop chart increase, but a real performance increase. Even big jumps in velocity don't matter. So to me, sacrificing the consistency of your load for 20 or 30 feet a second is stupid. And I see it all the time. I have a very difficult time reading comments on other videos where people are bragging about getting some unrealistic velocity with their little short barrel running a powder that's too slow at 70,000 psi to get some velocity nobody cares about, and they can't wait to tell everybody. In reality, it doesn't mean shit. It doesn't add nearly as much for performance as you think it does, and you look like a fool for those of us that are professionals and actually know how to do this stuff and know what we're doing. Anyway, rant over. So, sweet spot 2880 to 2920. That's where, regardless of the powder, it seemed like it wanted to shoot, which works out to an average muzzle velocity of 2988 foot-pounds. 7 PRC, our fired water capacity was just under 81 grains. So whatever that is, 9 grains more than the 280. Our max velocity was about 3070, thereabouts. And again, this was the asterisk I should have with the 7 PRC and the 7 Rem Mag. I was achieving max velocity on a new barrel, which I really would have liked to find out what that was on a barrel that was completely broke in. I'm not exactly sure what it would have been. It might have been a little higher than these two, but they were treated the same. So, people really wanted a 7 PRC versus 7 Rem Mag comparison. And although these max velocities might be on the low side for what is really achievable, they were treated the same. So it's a fair comparison. 7 PRC, 3070 max velocity, sweet spot around 3030 to 3060 once the barrel was broken, which works out to 3295 foot-pounds, approximately. 7 Rem Mag, 85.04 grains, fired water capacity. Max velocity, I put 3130 with a question mark because I didn't actually get to the max velocity because I never saw the pressure sign that I was looking for. that I found with the other 3 cartridges. I never found that with the 7 Rem mag. So I don't actually know what our max would have been. I'm guessing that 3130 is really close. Might have been 3140, 3150, but I think we were right there. Sweet spot was, and ultimately that number doesn't matter because where it shoots is what matters. The sweet spot is what matters, not the max velocity, as I said earlier in the series. Sweet spot 3090 to 3120, which works out to 3,426 foot-pounds. Again, when these are both loaded to the same pressure, looking for the same pressure signs. 28 Nosler, almost 100 grain fired water capacity, just a monster. Max velocity was right around 3330 with all 3 powders. I think it was maybe just over, but that 3330 is about where it tapped out. But it did want to shoot at the top. Sweet spot was 3300 to 3330. The Rotumbo shot up there when it was cold, and then the N565 was right up there. Was shooting between 3325 and 3315, and really consistent. Again, had the best ES in the whole series. That muzzle energy is 3,905 foot-pounds, and then also up here in the yellow, I put what that worked out to for velocity per grain of water capacity. So you see here, as the cases get bigger, this is the way this works, is the bigger the cases get, the more it's a law of diminishing returns kicks in. And you start at 41.13 feet per second per grain for the 280. By the time you get to the 28 Nosler, it's down to 33.35. And there's nothing you can do about that. Just when you're trying to pound more powder down a small hole, you get more velocity, but it's diminishing returns. You're wasting more to get that velocity. And not only in terms of components, but barrel life and whatever. And we'll go into that on the next video where we talk about cost to own and my reflections. So then we'll just briefly look at the long range performance of this and where each cartridge kind of tapped out based on elevation. The 280, we start running out of reliable, in my opinion, reliable terminal performance on elk and moose, big targets, at 400 yards. Deer, you can maybe add 100 yards, like I said earlier. At sea level, I don't think I would add any additional distance for deer because it's a smaller target and you don't have the atmosphere on your side. 5,000 feet, you see we gained 100 yards. Going from sea level to 5,000 feet, we picked up 100 yards. So max effective is 500. And at 10,000 feet, it goes out to 600. So, like I said at the beginning of the series, each of these cartridges has the goods to humanely dispatch an elk at 600 yards at 10,000 feet or 9,000 feet or above in the mountains. The 280, it's barely. It's just enough. 2281 feet per second and 1850 on the retained energy. 7 PRC and 7 Rem Mag were very similar. They both picked up at sea level and 5,000 feet. They both picked up 100 yards over the 280. And then the 7 PRC picked up 100 yards over the 280 at 10,000 feet. So our max effective at 10,000 feet for the 7 PRC, and our 4831 hand load is 700 yards. Just from a sheer velocity and energy standpoint, that doesn't count your ability to read wind and all the stuff that we talked about in the series. 7 Rem Mag, because it was about 50 feet a second faster, 50 to 60. At sea level and 5,000 feet, that didn't matter. The effective range is the same as the 7 PRC, although the arrival energy is a little higher and the arrival energy is a little higher. The effective range is the same. And then coincidentally, at 10,000 feet, you did gain 100 yards of effective range over the 7 PRC with the 7 Rem Mag. So that max effective on paper is 800 from a velocity and energy standpoint. But again, we already said we don't want you shooting that far. And then the 28 Nosler, with all its fire-breathing dragonness, picked up 100 yards over the 7 Rem Mag and the 7 PRC only at sea level. picked up 200 yards at 5,000 feet, and an additional 200 yards over the 7 mag at 10,000 feet. So all that monstrous velocity helps a lot at high elevation, but it's diminishing returns as you go down towards sea level. You gain less and less over these other cartridges because there's so much drag in that thick air that it just burns off all your velocity and swallows up that advantage. And you see, we just snuck by the skin of our teeth for energy out here at 1,000 yards with the 28 Nosler, 2252 velocity, 1803 on the energy. So just barely. So I know that was a ton of information. Let's see how long our recording was. I had the camera on for over an hour, so that's a pretty long video. I think that's about enough for this one. So again, that's it for this one. Next, we'll go into, so you see, I guess to summarize, the performance that you get from going to a much bigger, much faster cartridge. It's more so like when they all shoot the same level of precision. The performance advantage is more on the energy front, not necessarily on hit probability and wind forgiveness. You do gain a bunch in range forgiveness, but the wind forgiveness is not that significant. It's not as significant as you would think it would be. And the range error forgiveness is pretty significant. But again, I'd like to think that we could get a more accurate range than even the 280 would require. What you're gaining with that big cartridge is that flat trajectory, and then shorter time of flight, which is fairly significant, and then energy on arrival. So you're getting more energy when it hits the target. It's going to be hitting at any given distance. It's going to be hitting at a higher velocity and likely to penetrate a little deeper, depending on expansion, as long as the animal isn't too close. We're delivering more energy and trauma to the animal. But from an external ballistic standpoint, like how the bullet flies through the air and how much forgiveness you're going to get wind-wise, it's not as significant as you may think. Where comparing these cartridges and just drop and drift charts is very misleading. And you see when the rubber meets the road, it's not as big of a difference as you might think. So I think that's it for this one. Next, we will do the final video for this series, where we'll talk about cost to own. So now that we know the performance and what each of these is capable of, and what the real advantages are ballistically and terminally and all that stuff, what does it cost to operate these things? And how much is it going to cost you on a per shot basis when you consider factory ammo, hand loading, components, how much brass you need, brass life, barrel life, which does matter. I see that a lot where guys talk about, barrel life on a hunting cartridge doesn't matter because nobody's ever going to shoot it enough to wear out the barrel. Well, you should be. If you're shooting past even 200 yards, you should be shooting a lot. And barrel life, it's like saying tire life doesn't matter or engine life doesn't matter. It's a stupid statement. It matters, because what are you going to do? Like shoot the barrel out and then pass it down to your kids with a shot out barrel? Like, it matters. So the barrel life should be factored into the cost of operation as well, just like anything else. Like if you're figuring out cost to operate of a vehicle, you would factor in tires, oil, gas, all of it. You wouldn't cherry pick. So I don't know why you're doing it with guns. It's a stupid statement. It bugs me. Anyway, so we're going to talk about cost to operate. And then I'm going to talk about kind of my takeaways for each cartridge and what my thoughts are for each one and who I think they're best suited for. And then I'll kind of say, okay, like if I built one of these personally, what would I do with each one, and where do I think they should live and breathe? And hopefully with all that information, after doing this whole long series, you can make a very informed decision and figure out which cartridge is best for you. I'm not going to tell you which one's the best one, because there isn't a best one. The best one depends on who I'm talking to. and where they live and what you're going to do with it and how old you are and if you hand load and on and on and on and on. Like, your particulars dictate what's the best one, not the performance or anything else. So that's it. Thank you guys for your steady support and all the love you're giving me in the comments and through emails and phone calls, and everything's been going really well. So I'm really happy with the turnout on this. I only wish we had a bigger subscriber audience when we started this, but I think that's going to come in time, especially with what we have coming down the pipe. And I think this hand loading series, I know all you guys are going to watch it. I think that series might actually be more helpful for you hand loaders than this series was, if you can believe that. So looking forward to that, but I think I'm actually going to film the final video for this series tomorrow, so I'm going to try to start putting stuff out in quicker succession now that it's awful out. You see it's -3 outside. So hopefully I'll be able to increase the cadence on these videos and try to bury you guys in some content while you're sitting at home this winter. So I think that's it. Thank you. Like, subscribe, share with your friends, all that good stuff, and we'll see you on the next one.